the makeup category at the Oscars. It has evolved throughout the decades. Now the makeup and hairstyling category, it's become a major predictor in who might win Best Actor or Best Actress. 2022, the win in the makeup category goes to The Eyes of Tammy Faye. Later that night, Jessica Chastain wins Best Actress for The Eyes of Tammy Faye. 2023, The Whale wins in the makeup category over Elvis. And then in Best Actor, Brendan Fraser wins over Austin Butler. And then this year, most everyone was predicting Best Actress was going to Lily Gladstone for Killers of the Flower Moon. But when the winner of Best Makeup and Hairstyling went to Poor Things, it seemed inevitable. Emma Stone was taking the gold trophy for Best Actress, which she did. So yeah, a win in makeup and hairstyling these days has become a reliable predictor for wins in acting, but that was not what this category was all about in its early days. The movie that took Best Makeup in the 1980s was often not even nominated in Best Actor or Actress, let alone any other category at the Academy Awards. In that first decade of the award, only Amadeus and Driving Miss Daisy were victorious in Best Makeup before dominating in other top categories like Best Picture. Other winners included Quest for Fire, Mask, and Harry and the Hendersons, movies almost entirely remembered now for their impeccable work in makeup. But the absolute coolest thing makeup at the Oscars gave us in those early years of the category was a series of well-deserved wins for the horror genre. In the 1970s, the Academy recognized a few notable horror films, namely The Exorcist, The Omen, and Carrie. But in the 1980s, you really don't see the genre much at the Oscars, the closest thing being 1987's Fatal Attraction, which is more of a thriller really, only turning into a slasher film in that famous final scene. No, pretty much the only representation horror got at the Academy Awards during this time was in the makeup category, namely with three landmark films of the genre: 1981's An American Werewolf in London, 1986's The Fly, and 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula. How have these Oscar wins stood the test of time? What was their competition in the category? And why the hell did horror films stop winning in Best Makeup? My name is Brian Rowe, this is the awards contender, and my series Horror and the Oscars continues today with special guest Andrew Campbell. Sit back, relax, and let's get started. So when exactly did the Academy introduce the Best Makeup category? A few decades too late, in my opinion, as I talked about with Andrew. So yeah, I have always loved the makeup category, Andrew. It's shocking to me that they did not have this as an Oscar category until 1982.
Yeah,
like you go back
crazy.
to the 1930s. Speaking of horror films, like Boris Karloff in Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. Like that not getting an Oscar for makeup feels weird until you go, oh, well, they didn't have the category for 50 more years.
Yeah.
There were two Special Achievement Awards given to makeup artists in the 1960s for 1964's Seven Faces of Dr. Lao, and most notably 1968's Planet of the Apes. You would think Planet of the Frickin' Apes would have jump-started a movement to get an annual Best Makeup category going at the Oscars, but it still took another decade and change to finally make it happen. And then what did it, Andrew, was 1980, David Lynch's The Elephant Man comes out. Have you seen that movie or heard of The Elephant Man?
Yes, my brother was obsessed with it.
So the main actor in that, John Hurt, he has prosthetics all over his face and body to make him look,
ginormous.
And it was so impressive that there became this need for a makeup category because early 81 came and went. And people were like up in arms. Like, how can you not give The Elephant Man a Best Makeup Oscar? This is ridiculous. Yep, we can thank David Lynch's The Elephant Man for giving us Best Makeup after so many decades. And at the 54th Academy Awards on March 29th, 1982, Vincent Price and Kim Hunter were the first presenters of the category. Just two nominees that first year: the mostly forgotten fantasy comedy Heartbeat starring Andy Kaufman, and the now classic horror film An American Werewolf in London.
Aren't you supposed to be buried someplace in New York?
Yeah. Your parents came to my funeral. I was surprised at how many people came.
The winner was, of course, An American Werewolf in London, which both Andrew and I think to this day is one of the greatest victories in the category.
The change into the werewolf is so fluid, and it's so natural, and it's not CGI, which is just like incredible. And I feel like that's also, what has changed so much over the past, 20 years is the use of CGI instead of, practical effects. They could have gotten away with just, he falls behind the couch and you hear these noises and you hear this screaming and he comes up and he's all like, oh my God, I'm a werewolf. And we all would have been like, sure, yeah, that it's a werewolf, that happened. But like seeing every single, you see his hairs come out, you see his feet and his hands like elongate, and you see even the physical bone structure of his face like slowly starts changing. It's so natural.
Yeah, and that's not the only scene in that movie. Like, there's a scene where Griffin Dunn is, like, the friend character, and he's dead, and we see him, like, kind of as a ghost, kind of as, like, he's hallucinating, and he's got, like, blood and, like, his flesh dangling off his neck, and it's like, oh, it's so gross and disgusting. And it amuses me that, in 1981, this is the year that big, dramatic, epic films like Chariots of Fire and Reds win in the top categories like director and picture. And then down in makeup, we're giving an award to a werewolf movie that's like hard R rated, grotesque, very creative. And that's what I love about the makeup category, is that it gives some of these other genre movies a chance to shine at the Oscars. Yeah. This was the first win at the Oscars for a horror film since The Omen took Best Original Score in 1977, and who better than the one and only Rick Baker to become the first recipient of the Best Makeup Oscar. Here's a little of his speech.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Academy for creating this new category, and I'm very proud to be the first winner. Yes.
Now, 5 years later came my favorite win in the Best Makeup category for one of the most creative, absorbing, emotionally devastating horror films ever made, David Cronenberg's The Fly.
You're jealous! I've become free, I've been released, and you can't stand it. You'll do anything to bring me down.
Up against the Clan of the Cave Bear and Legend in the makeup category in 1987 at the 59th Academy Awards, The Fly was announced as the winner by the late great Rodney Dangerfield.
But I'm here tonight to present the award for makeup. And makeup is important. I mean, in movies, everybody wants to look good, And who always wins the award? The guy who creates the ugliest creature there is.
What does Andrew think of the makeup work in The Fly?
It's disgusting. When his ear falls off and there's like pussy and it's gooey. Oh no! Like it was making me sick to my stomach. When Gina Davis like hugs him and holds him with his nasty dead ear, right? And nasty like ear. I'm like, girl, like you must really love him because that's disgusting.
It kind of surprises me in the greatest of ways that it actually won the Oscar for Best Makeup. Yeah. You would think that in 86, 87, like there would have been enough Academy members who just like refused to even watch the movie. I don't want to watch that. In some ways, that's why I love this Best Makeup win, because enough Academy members could have overlooked The Fly due to the grotesque, hard R-rated nature of the work. However, at the end of the day, I just think there's an astonishing element to this movie that worked in tandem with the spectacular makeup effects that just couldn't be overlooked. I do think, as extraordinary as the makeup effects are in The Fly, and this kind of still is the case today in the makeup category, the Oscars, you can only do so much great work with the makeup. It all comes down to the performance. Yeah. Jeff Goldblum is on another level in this movie. He makes it so believable. The pain he's in that second half. If the performance wasn't at the level of what Jeff Goldblum is giving us in The Fly, I'm not sure if The Fly would have won Best Makeup at the Oscars. It's matching this incredible, innovative makeup effects with the Goldblum performance. I mean, there in the last third of that movie, there are close-ups, like right here on Goldblum, and all you see are his eyes. Like, he is covered, and he's doing like these little ticks, like he's kind of turning into an insect while he's talking. Mm-hmm. He's going like this. And it's unlike any performance ever committed to film. I just think what he did in that movie is extraordinary. And The Fly should have gotten 2 Oscar nominations, makeup and Best Actor for Goldblum. and I will stand by that for the rest of time.
I'll support you. I support that decision.
Even the recipients of The Fly's Best Makeup Oscar, Chris Wallace and Stephen Dupuis, spent most of their speech giving a deserved shout-out to the one and only Jeff Goldblum.
Mr. Jeff Goldblum for doing such an incredible performance, being buried under 5 pounds of grotesque makeup. Thank you, Jeffrey, for your patience.
Thanks, Jeff.
More fantastic Oscar wins in makeup followed, like Harry and the Hendersons, which netted Rick Baker his second victory in the category, and Beetlejuice, of course, which might not technically be a horror film, it's more a fantasy, supernatural comedy, but it does have its scary moments, am I right? Hey, Beetlejuice, when I saw that movie as a kid, that movie came out when I was 4, and it scared me to death. There are a couple moments in that movie that, like, I had to leave the room. I mean, there are specific moments in Beetlejuice that have incredible makeup, like at the end when Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, remember, are slowly turning old.
Yes, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Like, she's in her wedding dress and she's just like starts to get older and older, and so it's like Gina Davis didn't have to go through any makeup on The Fly, but she had to in Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
The next big horror film to win Best Makeup arrived in 1992 with Francis Ford Coppola's big-budget adaptation, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and unlike An American Werewolf in London and The Fly, this actually won in other categories too, costume design and sound effects editing.
I was betrayed. Look what your God has done to me.
And up against Batman Returns and Hoffa, Bram Stoker's Dracula took home the gold trophy for makeup. What did Andrew and I think about this win?
No, I think it's so well deserved because there's so many different forms that Dracula is in. Whenever I see a vampire movie, they always kind of stick to one style of vampire. And I love, like, with this one, like, they had so many different makeup styles and different ways of creating this.
I still remember as a kid in 92 seeing the TV promo trailer for Bram Stoker's Dracula, and it ends with Gary Oldman in the full makeup going and it like cuts out to black, and I'm like, oh my god, I am not seeing that movie. When I think about these Oscar wins for makeup for these horror films, it is a lot about performance.
Yeah.
Like, if just an average actor was playing Count Dracula in that movie, I don't know if it necessarily wins Best Makeup. But Gary Oldman is so believable under all of those layers, and he's so iconic and memorable. Like, I think of that movie, and he's the image I think of first. That's a really good reason why this went on to win Best Makeup. It was unavoidable. We had to recognize that amazing work in Bram Stoker's Dracula. The recipients of the Best Makeup win for Bram Stoker's Dracula were Greg Canham, Michelle Burke, and Matthew W. Mungle. Here's an excerpt from their speech.
Thank you, Gary Oldman, especially for your incredible performance and patience, and for this and the opportunity. Thank you, Francis Ford Coppola.
The fantastic makeup wins at the Oscars kept coming throughout the rest of the 1990s, including Mrs. Doubtfire, Ed Wood, The Nutty Professor, and Men in Black. But as we moved into a new century, where had the horror genre disappeared to in the makeup category at the Academy Awards? In the last 30 years, there's really only been one more win for a horror film, the underwhelming flop remake The Wolfman, starring Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, and Emily Blunt, which beat out non-competition Barney's Version and The Way Back in 2011 to take the Best Makeup Oscar. So you have this ceremony where, like, we're celebrating The King's Speech and Black Swan and The Social Network and all of these great films released at the end of 2010. And then we have a segment dedicated to The Wolfman winning an Oscar for Best Makeup.
Well, I also just looked it up, and the audience score and the tomato meter are all the same of 33%. So I'm going to give this one a pass. I probably won't be seeing this one, but I'm very happy to see that a horror movie was given an Oscar nomination.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it, even though that movie is pretty terrible. At least the horror genre got recognized for something at the Oscars, which these days is pretty frickin' rare. And one other thing I adore about this win is how Rick Baker, who won his first makeup Oscar for a werewolf movie in 1982, won his 7th and to date final makeup Oscar for another werewolf movie. Talk about perfect bookends to his many well-deserved trophies. Here's a segment from his speech alongside co-winner Dave Elsey.
It was always my ambition to lose an Oscar one day to Rick Baker. This is better. Thank you.
Now, since The Wolfman, we've had some cool wins and nominations in the makeup category, Mad Max Fury Road, and Poor Things, of course. But what happened to the horror genre being recognized here? Why the hell do scary movies get overlooked year to year, time and time again, in what is now Best Makeup and Hairstyling? Ultimately, I think the answer is pretty simple. So Rick Baker, he wins the Oscar for The Wolfman in early 2011, and then he retires in 2015, and I read a thing about him earlier. He said he retired because pretty much all the work he was doing was going CGI. And there just wasn't enough for him to do anymore in terms of the practical effects. And I do think outside of like indie horror films, some of these smaller budget horror films will have practical makeup effects. But those films are so small, it's hard to get into the Oscars these days when it's like a small budget genre movie. Like that just does not happen, sadly. So I do think that's why outside of The Wolfman, which was kind of an anomaly, there just wasn't a lot in 2010 to get into the Oscars in that category. That's why in the last 20 to 30 years, we don't really see horror films get into makeup anymore. Because a lot of that work has turned CGI, and that's not going to get an Oscar here. I think so many horror films in the last decade and beyond have deserved Oscar nominations in makeup, like The Conjuring 2, It, X, and Evil Dead Rises. Will this genre ever see a return to this category at the Oscars, according to Andrew?
I'm excited to see, I think the respect for horror movies among like the fans and like, the internet has gotten really responsive. And people are really, rooting for horror movies these days. New people are going to come in with new ideas, new perspective, and hopefully we'll be seeing some more horror, Oscar nominees. Because I think it's going to happen. It's taking some time, but it's weird to see that like horror, get all this great makeup, and then it went down, and then has stayed down. But I think you're right. I think CGI has had a huge input on that, and we'll see where it goes.
Yep, we shall see. I want to be optimistic. I don't want the makeup category to only recognize films nominated in Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Actress for the next 30 years and beyond. I want the horror genre to be nominated here again, and soon. Hell, I want to see a horror film win here again, just like those 3 all-timer victories I still adore to this day for Bram Stoker's Dracula, An American Werewolf in London, and my personal favorites, The Fly. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think of those 3 Oscar wins in Best Makeup for An American Werewolf in London, The Fly, and Bram Stoker's Dracula? And do you think we'll ever see a horror film nominated in Best Makeup again? We'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.